All right, here are solutions to the first quiz of the term for our online Math 243. What's going on for this quiz? There's two questions, two different scenarios. In the first scenario, I give you what will turn out to be an observational study. So let's see, I'm interested in determining the average number of hours spent watching TV per day among all quarantined adult males in the United States. I decided that an easy way to collect data would be to just send out a group email to 100 adult males who took a mountaineering class with me. Okay. After tabulating responses, I calculate the sample average to be 3.5 hours. So this is all the information you're given. And you're asked a bunch of questions. First question, who is the population in this study? Well, what you need to know is that the population is the large group about whom the question is concerned. So in this case, the group that the question is about is all quarantined adult males in the United States. So that'd be your population. I do not know how to spell quarantine. Let me look up there and stare at it while I write. All quarantined adult males in the United States. Sample. Okay, so the idea is you're asked a question about this group, and this group is really large. They're too large to measure directly. So you get a representative subset of that group, which is called the sample, or at least ideally it's a representative subset. And that group you measure directly. And that group that you measure directly is what's called the sample. So in this case, I recognize there's so many adult males in the United States, I couldn't possibly, ask all of them how many hours of TV they watch. But maybe I could ask 100 of them. The sample is the 100 adult males. I don't know, I surveyed maybe, or I emailed, sure. The 100 that I actually got data from. So population sample, two pretty important concepts or vocabulary words that will get a lot of use in this class going forward. So I don't know, maybe it's fairly straightforward, but if there's any confusion at all between population and sample, that's something you definitely want to be solid with for this class. A lot of the stuff that comes up later in this quiz isn't nearly as important as that. So maybe it seems like I'm making a big deal out of it, but I just want you to be solid on that because I know it'll help you later on. What mistake did I make in choosing this sample? How will it affect my conclusion? All right, so the story here is I want to draw a conclusion about the population. That's the whole goal. The question is about the population. I want my conclusion to be about the population. But I don't have population data because the population is too big. I have sample data. So I take the results from my sample and I try to infer a conclusion about my population. Well, that all works fine if your sample represents your population. If your sample is a representative subset, is typically the phrase that's used, of your population, then great. Then you can take those results and kind of extrapolate them to draw your conclusion about the population. But in this specific case, they're not, right? These 100 adult males happen to be 100 adult males who took a mountaineering class with me. They're not representative of the entire population of the United States. Maybe because they're taking a mountaineering class, they're more outdoorsy to begin with, and therefore the amount of time that they spend watching TV is different from the entire population. I don't know. The point is just the sample is not just some random representative subset of the population. What mistake did I make in choosing my sample? Sample is not a representative subset of the population. And you don't need to write exactly that, of course, but that's kind of the idea you want to get across. So how will this affect my conclusion? So I can't use sample data to make a conclusion about the population. Or I guess you could say that if you tried to use the sample data to make your conclusion about the population, it could be misleading or something to that effect. Fine, whatever. What is the parameter of interest in this problem? And then is 3.5 hours a parameter or statistic? So D and E are supposed to get you comfortable with the idea of the difference between a parameter and a statistic because they're pretty similar. They're both just kind of numeric measures about groups in your study. One of them is about the population, one of them is about the sample. Parameter is always about the population. Statistics always about the sample. The parameter of interest in this problem, the number that I'm interested in figuring out about the population, I'm interested in determining the average number of hours spent watching TV among all quarantined males in the United States. What is the parameter of interest? I don't know, population, average, TV, watchage. I don't know if that's a word. I'll say watching. Sure. That doesn't say TV. Jeez, try again. Population, average, TV, watching. Key idea here is it's the population that I'm talking about. The 3.5 hours, if you go back to this problem, is just only came from these 100 adult males who were in my sample. The fact that that number only represents my sample makes it a statistic. Is the 3.5 hour average a parameter or statistic? Is a statistic. Doesn't ask why, but the reason why is because it concerns the sample. And then finally, is my study observational or experimental? This one is observational. Why is it observational? Well, one way you can figure out is an experimental study will always have a treatment group and a control group, at least in this class it will. Maybe an easier way to think about it is kind of the root words here. Am I just observing what's already going on? Or am I telling people to change their habits? Am I conducting an experiment? In this case, I'm just observing what's already going on. These people are already quarantined. I'm just asking them a question. How many hours you spend watching TV? That's it. So it's an observational study. That's page 1 of the quiz. Page 2 of the quiz. Now, suppose that you did similar, that doesn't make any sense. You did a similar study where you randomly selected 100 adult males and had half live in quarantine for 30 days, while the other half were free to go outside as they please. That's my attempt to come up with something similar to the first question. That's no longer an observational study, it's now an experimental study. You're telling people to do stuff. At the end of the month, you created the data matrix below showing the 5 variables that you tracked. So you tracked whether each of these 100 people were quarantined or not. I think it says in the problem that half of them were and half were not. You tracked the hours of TV watched daily for each person. You also thought it was a good idea to track the number of children that these people have, the TV provider that they have, and the size of their backyard, large, medium, very small, very large, etc. What you're supposed to do is classify the variables below as one of these 4 types. Discrete numeric, maybe I'll call that just DN to be lazy. Continuous numeric, CN. Nominal categorical, NC. Ordinal categorical, OC. That's me being lazy. So this first one, were people quarantined? This is definitely not a number. This is a category. This is going to be categorical data. Is it nominal or ordinal? Well, anytime you have something that's yes, no, true, false, something like that, we always refer to it as nominal categorical. Ordinal categorical, there has to be kind of a natural ordering. And with just 2 things, there can't possibly be a natural ordering. Hours of TV watched daily. This column right here, this is going to be continuous numeric. It is numeric because you see a bunch of numbers here, and the average of these numbers would make sense. The average person in my study watched 3.2 hours of TV or something like that, sure. And we're going to call it continuous because an oversimplification that we're doing in this class is anytime you see decimals or fractions, it's continuous. Anytime you don't, like the number of children here, we're going to call it discrete. So the number of children would be discrete numeric. It's still a number. It still makes sense to average these out. I could say the average amount of children would be 1.8 or something. But the responses themselves, the data that you see, it's only whole numbers. It only can be whole numbers as discrete numeric data. And then I got 2 more. These are both categorical. They're clearly not numbers if you look at them. This one, it's just a bunch of different TV providers. There's no real ordering of these, which would come first, which would come second, third, and so on. It's just a bunch of different providers, Hulu or Netflix or DirecTV or whatever. These are definitely categories, but they're not ordered. They're not ordinal categories. They're nominal categories. However, backyard size, those are ordered. If you have a small backyard, you're pretty similar to someone who has a very small backyard. You're not at all similar to somebody who has a very large backyard. There's kind of a natural ordering here. Very small, small, medium, large, very large for backyard size. So because of how this data looks, this would be ordinal categorical. Man, I am screwing up all sorts of stuff. Ordinal categorical, I guess would be the abbreviation here. Anyways, is your study observational or experimental? It is definitely experimental. And that's because you're not just observing what's going on, you're changing people's behavior. You're telling half of these people to live in quarantine for 30 days. You're having them live in quarantine. Well, you're making the other half free to go outside. It's definitely experimental. All right, next we're asked to identify the treatment and the control groups in the study. So when you have an experimental study in this class, you will have a treatment and control group. And the treatment group is always the group that you are having do the thing that you are trying to study. So I think I'm going to go through and I'm going to reword this to try to make it more clear what the treatment and the control group is before I give you guys this quiz. But the idea is what you are supposed to be studying is how TV habits change when someone's in quarantine. So the ones that are in quarantine are the ones that are doing the thing that you're studying. Your treatment group will be the 50 people, adult males, that are in quarantine. And your control group will be the 50 that aren't in quarantine, the other 50, sure. And finally, is your study a blind study? Why not? It is definitely not. The reason why is a study is blind if participants don't know if they're in the treatment group or the control group. So think like I'm testing a drug and I give them all a drug, but I give them all a pill, but half of the pills are the real drug and the other half are kind of a fake drug meant to trick them. That's not going on here. If you're in this study, you know whether you're quarantined or whether you're going outside. You know which group you're in. So it's definitely not a blind study. Not blind because participants know if they're in quarantine or not. Something like that. For this and all quizzes, your answers definitely don't have to look like mine. I bet a lot of you came up with better looking answers than anything I have on this quiz. Just try to keep in mind, your grader is a very reasonable person and all she's trying to do is judge whether or not you've learned these topics. So try your best to answer the questions in such a way that just prove you know what the hell you're talking about, right? If you think one of these are kind of confusing, I'm not sure if that was nominal categorical or ordinal categorical. I think it's weird the way you wrote it. Fine. Put down either one and write a little note like, this is what it means to be nominal categorical. This is why I'm confused with the question the way it is. You know, that kind of thing. Everyone's going to try to be as reasonable as possible for your grade this term. Just try to prove you know what you're talking about. All right, that's all I got. These are the solutions to the first quiz. Hopefully that went okay for people.